and behavioral challenges. We are located at the Brookins Building at 1776 East Washington in Urbana, Illinois, and at the downtown location at 202 West Park Street.
And good afternoon, our lovely listening audience. This is Imani Bazzell, your host for Access Live. It is a lovely day this Wednesday, the last Wednesday in March, which is what? Women's History Month. So we're going to close Women's History Month out with a bang here on Access Live. As you know, we are sponsored by the Access Initiative, which is committed to the mental health and healing of African American youth, families, and our broader community. So, we are here in the spirit of community education and engagement and are very pleased to bring to you, while this new alliance is not an alliance of girls and women, we just gonna tell the truth and shame the devil. It's mostly girls and women who are making it happen. And we just inviting the brothers along as much as we can get them there. Regina, you smiling?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because it is true, but that's all right. Brothers work on other stuff. So, today, we are going to talk about what happens when black youth and their families are struggling, are facing crises. This is not something unfamiliar to us, and certainly we make sure we talk about every week. This week in particular, we bring the good news that the organizing is taking place, and we now have a new community alliance called the Family and Youth Peer Support Alliance. I got it?
You got it.
I got it. We got Regina Kreider is hiding back here. I don't know why she thinks the microphone's not going to get her and the camera's not going to see her. Y'all know how long I've been doing this show, right? Regina has been asked over and over, and she has finally given in.
How you gonna just put me out on front?
You on Front Street, baby. It's too late.
I
So
see.
just come on out.
All right, I'm
So, Miss Regina Kreider, many of you know, has been working with the Access Initiative for a few years now to work with the parent organizing aspect of the initiative. But the reason the Access Initiative went and got her from Rantoul, that's just right up the street, it don't count, it's all Champaign County, right?
Right.
They went and got her because it's what she was already doing with her SOAR program. So Regina is now a founding member and the acting board chair of this new alliance. So she's going to come and talk to us about the importance of being family guided and youth driven.
Family driven.
The other way, family driven and youth guided.
Yes. Yes.
Those are fundamental principles, of course, of building what we've talked about a lot, which is a system of care that is trauma and justice informed. So this system we're talking about is, of course, made up of all these different organizations and agencies that families like the ones we're going to talk about today are constantly trying to navigate, and heretofore often with little success. So remember, the point of the Access Initiative is to build this system of care, to make it easier, to make it what families need, especially families facing mental health or behavioral health issues. Let's work this out so we're not spending so much time caught up in the throes of trying to find who will help us do what when we have very little. And let's get everybody on the same page, sharing a same set of ethics and organizing principles. And now we have this new alliance that will be another seat at that table. Because in a participatory democracy, the only way it's going to work, President Obama was on the news live just this afternoon speaking from Belgium about how important democracy is while he tried to shame Putin and Russia. Well, what does that mean for us right here in Champaign County? How do we make participatory democracy work right here? We make it work when we are in the places where decisions are being made about our lives. And so one primary function of this alliance is that it will be a point of power. It will be a table, it will be a seat at the table where decisions are being made about our lives. So they aren't just being made for us, but they are being made with us, informed by our lived experience, our perspective, and our desire for the kind of life we want to live. What we're talking about here is youth and families joining together for what in Swahili we call kujichagulia, or in English we call it self-determination. In the studio with us as well is our good friend and consultant to the show, Dr. Helen Neville. Helen is an active member of SisterNet and works with other sisters each week to help do research and resource formation for us so we can come to you sounding like we know what we're talking about. So we are blessed to have Black women psychologists in our community who have come together to help us do this right. Helen is a professor in the Department of Educational Psychology and also which is in the College of Education, and also is in the Department of African American Studies. She serves as the chair of the Counseling Psychology program, and again, is a good friend and ally to the show. So first, welcome Helen. Helen's going to be here to help us stay on track because we are talking about mental health and hygiene, mental fitness, and Regina's going to keep us excited about how our community is healing, because that's what the Alliance represents, a step towards health and healing. So, Miss Regina, scoot on up here.
All right.
We'll just pass the microphone around, okay?
Okay.
So, Regina, I said a little bit about who you are. So before we get started with the Alliance, tell our listening audience on WBCP and our live audience, hello UPTV, thank you for joining us. Tell us, how did you get here?
Oh, wow.
How did you get to the point where you're now a founding member and acting board chair of a countywide alliance of families who want to help each other live well on their own terms? How'd you get here?
I think I was sharing with Dr. Neville's, correct? I say it's a testimony, but it actually started 4 years ago when I was sitting at home doing some work, and I got a phone call from my daughter's school that she had attempted to harm herself at school. And so that began my journey into understanding the issues, the limitations, the difficulties and complexities of children's mental health. Mm-hmm. So that was my baptism by fire.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yes.
But you know what? Some people will get the call that their daughter tried to harm themselves in school, and they won't end up being a founding member or acting chair of a county-wide alliance. Mm-hmm. What is it that allowed you that 4 years ago to be ready to rock and roll? Something.
I had done.
You had some sharp parents. You had a particular upbringing.
Yes.
You had a certain vision of life. Talk to us about that.
Well, I was in the military for 5 years, and when I came back home to Rantoul, I had saw that our community had changed. It was very different since the base had closed, and I didn't want to be a person who stood on the sidelines talking about what the issue was, and those kids need to pull up their pants, or these parents need to do this, that, and another. So I decided that I wanted to not talk about it, but be about it. And so I just started off with doing some summer programming in Rantoul. Janice Mitchell came up and gave me a hand. Gladys Hunt from when she was over at the Psychological Services Center, I worked
On
on campus.
And
yeah.
Janice runs the Urbana
Neighborhood
Services,
Connections,
Neighborhood
yeah.
Connections. That's right.
Right.
She changes. So a lot of you all know Neighborhood Connections over in Urbana, and Janice Mitchell, who is still the social worker
Yes.
at Urbana.
And so they helped me get my start in organizing and getting programs started for youth and beginning to work with parents. I worked for Gladys for 10 years on the Family Advocacy Program, which was funded through the Mental Health Board. For about 10 years, I did that. And then also I had some help from Dr. Lisette Piedra, who was at the School of Social Work, who took an interest in what I was doing up in Rantoul. And that's really how I got started, were people who kept saying, you know, you're doing a good job. And I didn't go to school for this. A lot of people feel like, you know, you have to have a degree or whatever. But to me, I feel like God opens doors that he wants to have opened. And so I don't have a degree in this, but I have the lived experience and good people who knew my heart, and that I just really have a desire to see families be whole and to be healed. And so that's really how I got started, was good people who saw good in me and wanted to help me with that mission.
Beautiful. Helen, she made a good point here. Now, I am certainly one for a solid formal and informal education. I will always promote that and promote the life of the mind, whether we're in school or not. But Regina makes an important point, and I think it's a point that you live as what we call a scholar activist. And so she said, I came to this out of my lived experience. And what helped me be successful is that people who had decided to go through school and get the degrees and become scholars held hands with me to help me make this happen. And that's sort of what you do for us, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, you went through, you got 3 degrees, you're the chair of a program, you're a full professor, but you've taken that book learning, as we call it, right? And you say, how can I use this for the people? So there's always a role for the people, right, who have to face our own problems and come up with our solutions. But I think as much as possible, holding hands with scholars such as yourself who have the knowledge and the consciousness to use that book learning to help the community solve its problems. How did you come to that?
Okay, so one, I'd like just to thank you for that. I feel like that's a compliment.
Girl, take it when you can get it.
One thing that I want to just correct, one thing I would like to correct a little bit is that learning is a two-way street.
Yes, it is.
And so in terms of working with others, sharing the knowledge, I also learned from that experience.
And you're able to maybe pass that on to your students.
On to the students. And so in counseling psychology and psychology, folks who do applied psychology, sometimes we call it, you know, the scientist practitioner model, where we can take what does the empirical research say about a thing, and then actually have a real life experience. And what does that real life experience tell us that we need to tweak some of the research we're doing? So it's this iterative process. So it's not just a one-way street. And so I think it's part of it is my training as a counseling psychologist to really understand where we learn, how we learn, who we learn from. And part of it is, I think, just growing up around Black leftists in terms of understanding humility, what that's like, understanding that everyone has knowledge, being influenced by Paulo Freire's kind of work in terms of folks don't come to us with as empty vessels. They come to us with life experience.
What they call it, tabula rasa.
Yeah, they don't
it's a European idea. You come as a blank slate.
Right.
And we say, nah.
Nah. People come with their own set of experience and own skills, and we need to acknowledge and respect that. And how can we work together and learn together? So that's just my approach.
Yes.
But if I could also, though, comment on something that Regina said that I think was particularly exciting, that does relate to some of the kinds of research that other folks are talking about, and that deals with this notion of family resiliency and family resilience. And a lot of times we don't get these images of Black family resilience.
We
get
just all
images
broke down.
And can't do anything. And so you just beautifully illustrated what is it like on an individual level, and then you want to work collectively, but on an individual level, what is it like for a family to bounce back after this incredible stressor?
Yes.
And that you were able to rely on available resources in the community, but also internal resources to help the family adapt.
Yes.
Now that doesn't mean that your child is mental health free and has a
Right.
perfect, but it does mean that she's highly functioning, that you have confidence that she's going to live a complete, full life and be able to contribute. So I
Absolutely.
think what you did was beautifully illustrate this notion of family
Doesn't
resiliency.
it? Isn't that fabulous? Yeah. So don't give it up yet. Let's stay with us for a while, because a lot of people want to know. You know, we live in the backyard of the university. And, you know, I've been blessed to know you and other scholar activists for many years since I've been in town. Somebody said they were out in some bar a few weeks ago and ran into who we still call the brother Dean Shelley. He's going to be 200 years old. Ain't been a dean in 50 years. It's still Dean Shelley. So they were laughing about me, and he said, that woman, she just does not know what no means, you know. So I'm always coming, right, Helen? She's so generous with me, Regina. But I'm always coming with my hand out. Helen, what do you think about this? Can you help me think well about this? How do you think we could put this or that together? So I want to say publicly how generous you have been with your own good thinking, your resources, your students, when you've been able to tie them in. And we're certainly working on other projects right now as we speak. But people want to know, how does that work, right? And what is the responsibility of the university? Of course, this is a public institution,
Right.
a land grant college. Can you say what a land grant college is and what public engagement is supposed to look like from a land grant college? You got tenure, so nobody can come after you.
I think that's a really good question, and a very challenging question, and one that I think the University of Illinois is really grappling with, and particularly the College of Education. And our mission is to provide the citizens of Illinois, or the folks, the residents of Illinois, with good quality education, and it should be open, and everyone should have access to that. And starting to ask the question, what does that really look like? What does that really mean? What does it mean for somebody in the College of Education to be able to reach out and provide services and share our knowledge? One of the things that I think that folks are trying to move toward is to think about how, not necessarily to incentivize, but to say that public engagement is a part of our mission. So that means it must be an aspect, or it should be an aspect, or it could be an aspect of our evaluation
Yeah,
process.
what you get rewarded for, what you get acknowledged for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they are putting in mechanisms to acknowledge and reward folks who are doing kind of public engagement activities, because they don't want a university town gown kind of split,
Right.
which unfortunately is a perception that exists in Champaign-Urbana. However, there is another piece to it too. I think that folks who are tenured, or professors like myself, shouldn't just be engaging in things because they're rewarded for it.
Correct.
They need to be engaging in things because there's a deep commitment to the community, and that's a core value of what it
Yes.
means to be a scholar.
To be a scholar, and that you are taking the lead from the community. Community said, this is what we want, would you help us get it? As opposed to you saying, I think you need this or that, right?
Right. Taking the lead.
Wonderful.
I like the way that you said that. But I think you you made an excellent point that it has to be someone with tenure, who has some security, who is doesn't have this, I have to get these and these grants or else I will not succeed.
Yes.
But you're right, to take the lead from the community
Yes.
as opposed to going into
Yes.
the community and say, this is the way things should be.
So while we work with younger professors, we need to make sure they're protected and working in partnership with tenured professors. So we're going to have to take a quick break. Got to keep the lights on. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Access Live can be heard every Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 3 p.m. on WBCP 1580 AM in Champaign-Urbana. You can learn more about the Access Initiative by visiting their website at www.access-initiative2.org.
And we are back. This is Imani Bazzell, your host for Access Live, a community education and engagement arm of the Access Initiative. We are so pleased to have in the studio with us here at WBCP our friends Regina Kreider, who is the new acting chair of the Family and Youth Peer Support Alliance, and Dr. Helen Neville, who is the chair of the Counseling Psychology Program, which is a part of the Educational Psychology Department of the College of Education, and is also a professor in African American Studies, and also a good sisternet woman who works with other Black women psychologists to consult with the show to make sure we are on top of the mental health and healing implications of the topics we are addressing. And every now and then we're lucky enough to also get her in the studio. So again, welcome Helen and welcome Regina.
Thank you.
Now, Regina, why this alliance? What let you know? I love that you talked about your own personal experience with getting that phone call and having to step to the plate when it came to your daughter. And then you started finding other parents who were having similar problems.
Absolutely.
How did this end up becoming a county-wide thing? What are you seeing with youth, with behavioral health diagnoses? Maybe tell us a little bit about what they are. Maybe there are some common diagnoses, how families have addressed them or been unable to address them, and what you hope is going to happen now.
I think what I have seen over the years in working in the various school settings is that oftentimes youth can be determined to have a behavioral problem. Oftentimes they want to label our children as being what? ADHD, right? Exactly. And so some of the signs that I think that parents can begin to look at it and say, if my child has always had a history of academic struggle, where is that coming from? Is there something that I'm missing? I was sharing with Imani during the break that I feel like we are at a place of heightened desperation where the alarm needs to be sound. We need a town crier saying to the community at large, our children are hurting. Our children need help. Our children need resources. And I attribute it to the same thing where we have become so conscious about ensuring that our children get a checkup every single year. Every year, my daughter, my son, I'm make sure that they get their eyes checked, their teeth checked and cleaned, and I'm encouraging them to, sleep well and, get enough 8 hours of sleep, get in exercise, all these different initiatives, that are coming up and saying these are the things that we need to do to live better,
Because
to
you
live longer.
educated yourself about those things.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. And there's a lot of public awareness around it, but we don't see the same type of initiative being placed in children's mental health. At least I don't see it as much in this community as we need it to be. So just like we would get our kids, eyes checked, we should be getting and screening our children for mental health. This is important. You can discover a lot about your child with those types of screenings. You can take that information and then you can make a decision about what you want to do.
Yes.
That's one of the things I always tell parents is that once you find out if there's an issue, you get to make the decision about how you want to address it and how you want to handle it.
Right, and what we want to do is make informed decisions.
Absolutely.
And may I offer this, and I want to see what your experience is. Oftentimes we associate some kind of diagnosis or even pre-diagnosis with how smart we think someone is.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, my testimony is I have a son who was gifted and talented in school, but was struggling.
Yes.
Until he was diagnosed with ADD, not ADHD,
Yes.
not with hyperactivity, but still there's this frontal lobe thing happen where they organize the world differently,
Yes.
are easily distracted.
Yes.
And so that then becomes about, we didn't medicate him,
Yes.
but there still becomes some strategies you can learn to help them be
Absolutely.
successful. So it had nothing to do with his intellect.
No.
It had to do with his ability to access his intellect
Yes.
and interact with the world in the way that he could be successful.
Yes.
And we want to say the same thing about the children you're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They are more than capable of doing so. And one of the ways that I kind of explain this to parents is this. We parent our children in a way, to me, that doesn't always help them to be successful at school. So little Johnny may have been presenting signs that he's having some challenges, but because of the way our home is structured or whatever the case may be, that's just little Johnny. If I tell little Johnny to sit down, little Johnny gonna sit down. If I tell little Johnny go to bed, he goes to bed. But when he goes to school and he has to be self-directed and not others directed, then you begin to possibly see some of those challenges. And so little Johnny is like, well, if all I'm going to do is get sent to the office when the teacher tells me to sit down, and when I go home there's nothing else to go along with that, then that's when we begin to possibly see some behavioral issues. But this is the other thing I tell parents: what kids are doing at school are oftentimes what they're doing at home, and you just chalk that up as that's just who little Johnny is. But little Johnny may have some things that need to be checked out, and then make the adjustments. It doesn't have to be like you said with you. You could have done medication with your son, or like you said, teach him strategies, change his food, or
and change his environment.
So
So we wrote up what you call, so children who have a special education, a diagnosis that qualifies them for special education, we know they get what we call an IEP plan.
Yes.
Well, you don't get an IEP plan with ADD or even ADHD. You get what's called a 504 plan, which is an accommodation plan.
Yes.
And so I wasn't happy with how fast the school was doing it. Honey, I wrote it myself.
Yes.
And when we had those meetings where all the teachers and administrators had to be there, I'd sit at the head of the table. I'd welcome my son's success team. I'm so happy you're here. And these are the things we agreed to, that he would do A, B, and C, and you would do E, F, and G, and at home we would do X, Y, and Z.
You have to have that at home.
And we had to I felt that I had to remind the school people, hey, you're a part of my son's success team.
Yes.
We're working together on this, because everybody's always in a hurry.
Yes.
So what were some of the things? He will sit in the front of every class.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
He'll sit in the front of the class. If need be, he might get 15 extra minutes to finish a test.
Yes.
He'd have maybe an extra day to turn an assignment in without being punished for it. Things like that.
Yes, makes all the difference in the world.
So it still means he's got to work, he's got to pay attention, but we're doing something with the environment, and we're making sure the adults in his environment are all on his side.
And that's what the Alliance brings to the table as well, because not every parent is like yourself or like me, who goes out and do the research and ask the questions and find the Dr. Neville's to say, well, what do I do? And so what the Alliance will offer for parents is someone who's a peer supporter, who can go into those meetings with them, help them know what to put in the 504 plan, what to advocate for their parent, for their child, whether it's a 504 plan or if it's an IEP. A lot of times kids are getting underserved with their individual education plans because parents don't know what's supposed to go in it. They don't understand the language. The whole process of having an IEP can be so overwhelming.
Oh, it's huge.
I've walked walked into many of IEP meetings where there's 15 people from the school sitting at the table and one parent.
Yeah.
And so we will provide that as a support to parents who are navigating the education system, juvenile justice system, and the mental health field, to be that support to them, to help them know how to navigate those systems, because the goal of the Peer Support Alliance is to help transfer skills.
Yes.
We want to transfer the skill, and I tell parents, you can do this. I'm going to be with you for a short amount of time, but during this time, I'm going to help you develop and gain the knowledge and the skills that you need to advocate for your child. And you know you're there when you walk in the room and they hate to see you come. So you've
I
arrived.
know what that feels like.
or you send out an email, and you know when you start learning how to CC the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, yes, then you know that you're on the right track. And
That's
so you
right.
teach them those skills of how to advocate for their child in any system.
Yes.
And that is what the Alliance is about.
And it doesn't have to be adversarial.
It doesn't.
You're prepared to be if they push you there.
Yes.
But it doesn't have to start there.
No, and a lot of it is that it won't be adversarial if they know that you know what you're talking about.
Correct.
It won't be adversarial. And oftentimes people will then become more respectful,
That's
more
right.
helpful, and more accommodating when they know that you know
Yes.
your stuff. And like you said, making sure that they are following the plan. Because one of the things I tell parents is that your child is not the only child in the school.
No.
And we want our child to be the most important thing, but we have to keep reminding them that they are the most important thing when you're dealing with my
That's
child
right.
at that moment.
That's right.
And so we want to equip and empower parents to be able to do that effectively and well.
So, Dr. Neville, can you speak to this a little bit, just in terms of the broader history and relationship of black parents, the black community, to the educational system? Because there's a backdrop for this, right? These aren't just these individual, this child has a problem, that child has a problem. But there's some systematic things going on in terms of race and access to quality and equitable education. So can you put what she's talking about in a broader systems context?
Sure, I can try to address some of those issues. One of the things that was exciting that you were talking about, Regina, is the ways in which that black parents should feel empowered to interact in the community, because we know throughout history there's been a way in which black parents have been excluded throughout the process, have been made to feel as though they don't even belong on the campus or on the school grounds.
Right.
Yet they've been shown to then be pathologized as not being interested in their child's welfare and stuff. So I think this whole issue about letting parents know that yes, they do belong on the school grounds, and yes, they can actively advocate for their child's behalf is incredibly important, because there are systems at play that minimize parents' contributions. So it could be the way they're immediately dismissed, either through the support staff there, people that they've meet. And this has to do with all kinds of forms of racism, whether it's this interpersonal form of racism, but also structural racism in terms of how people are left out. So I really think that what you're saying is important. And we know, the empirical data suggests that when parents are involved at the level you're suggesting, that they do well, they perform better, that there's greater outcomes. So, and there's another concept that we use in psychology that I think is an important concept, and that's this notion of cultural mistrust. And I'm not sure if folks are familiar with that, but that is not where people are paranoid. It's where there is a healthy cultural distrust of a system that's based on a history of racism in dealing with that. And so a lot of times people say it could be dealing with the Tuskegee, or it could be dealing with, however else that how the school system, particularly, not the medical system, but how the school system has consistently responded to black folks, whether it's through having the police there, whether it's through the no tolerance policies, whatever. That's set up an adversary relationships. And so black parents coming into it don't feel as though that the teachers or the system represents
We
their
come
interesting.
skeptical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Skeptical. So how is it that folks can deal with this cultural mistrust? And part of that is dealing with the school systems to talk about realistically, are there things set up here that silence people, that that create this level of distrust, and how can we intervene to reduce some of that? So I just want to say, so that's a little bit about some of the things that I think psychology has.
Wonderful. So, some of these diagnoses, again, we said, I want from a psychological perspective, 'cause I know there's different ways. I know you've done community psychology as well as counseling psychology, right? And you're in the education department. So what are some of these common diagnoses that we're seeing black children being labeled with? We know the ADHD thing is really big. Oppositional defiance is one. What are some other ones that come? Conduct disorder.
And so these are ways in which what ends up happening is that black children are misdiagnosed sometimes. So they're overdiagnosed for things such as conduct disorder, oppositional disorder, attention deficit with hyperactivity, and they're underdiagnosed for things such as depression and anxiety. And those are
the things that white kids and middle class kids
are being
diagnosed
diagnosed as.
Yes.
And I don't think there's a lot of research on what does depression look like for black children? What does anxiety look like for black children? And so some of the research that is emerging says that some of the quote unquote acting out behavior are really signs and symptoms of depression among children, particularly children who've experienced some form of traumatic.
Yes.
And so that's what we're missing. So the thing is to making sure that our children are accurately diagnosed or assessed so that they can get the treatment or intervention that's needed, and opposed to being pathologized in a way that we think that a conduct disorder
That's
is.
so exciting. And that's really what the Access Initiative is about. It's to build this trauma and justice informed system of care. So if we look at what's happening with our young people and our families through a trauma lens or through a social justice lens, you might start coming up with different diagnoses and different answers to what we think the problems are. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back with some news and some answers we can use in our lives today. We'll be right back.
The Access Initiative mission is to build a trauma and justice informed system of care designed to create a healed community that works to ensure that youth and their families are resilient, resourceful, responsible, and restored.
And we're back. This is Imani Bazzell, your host for Access Live, a community education and engagement initiative of the Access Initiative. What we are primarily concerned with is the mental health and healing of the African American community in every way that manifests itself. So we are always sure to be consulting with and including psychologists and behavioral health specialists. Today we are super excited to have one of our regulars who's normally behind the scenes, Professor Helen Neville, who is the chair of the Counseling Psychology program at the University of Illinois, and also teaches out of the Department of African American Psychology, and also organizes SisterNet women who are psychologists to help us with research and resource development. We also have with us a very resourceful parent and woman we want to know here in Champaign County, Miss Regina Kreider, who founded the SOAR program in Rantoul, has personal experience with working with a child with a mental health diagnosis, and is most recently a founding member and the acting chair of the Family and Youth Peer Support Alliance. Welcome again.
Thank you.
So, during the break, Regina, we were talking about one of the things you learned, which was you've got to get those checkups regularly. Just because you've got this one diagnosis, you still want to check in regularly.
Yes.
Is it still this? Are there other manifestations going on?
Yes.
Sometimes what we see in a child, they may mature out of.
Yes.
It may be temporary, or maybe for a particular era of their life, and maybe has different manifestations as adults.
Yes.
Maybe they overcome it. It sounds like you were saying, for instance, in your family's experience, maybe your daughter's going to have this challenge her whole life. The question will be, as she matures, as she gets older, will she be more and more capable? We also talked with Helen about sometimes the overdiagnosis of African Americans. I do want to tell this little, sometimes stories are from our own life, and sometimes I really like TV. And there's a new show I discovered on the Sundance Channel called The Red Road, if anybody out there has watched it. So it's set up with, it's not a town gown, but it's sort of the town, sort of the primarily white town, and a Native American community or settlement that they say when they refer to up in the mountains. They're talking about the Native Americans. And it's how those two populations of people are interacting with one another. And there's some classic things you can see. At some point something's going to come up about environmental justice, because, you know, there's been reference to, we've been playing in the dirt, and you can see their skin's all messed up. They're fighting for federal recognition, which will allow more funding and resources, etc. So anyway, speaking of mental health diagnoses, there is one of the stars. She might be Jack Nicholson's daughter. I never thought about that, but her last name is Nicholson, and she's probably of the right age. But I digress. As it begins, we find out that she is an alcoholic, that she is in the early stages of sobriety, right? So, you know, in the present, people refer to things in the past, so you sort of figure out. So she's upset that her daughter, this is a white family, the father's a police officer, that the daughter is involved with a Native American boy, and they're not having it, right? So there's, you know, big hullabaloo, stay away from my daughter, I tell you never to see him again. We know that story. And then we start to figure out, sounds like the mom was similar to the daughter when she was a teenager.
Right.
Maybe she had a relationship with a Native American boy, right? And something went wrong. She ended up, her twin brother ends up drowning or something. So there's a lot of drama that will unfold over the life of the show. But in the most recent episode, so we can see she has started to have some pretty strong behaviors. And they're thinking, oh, is she drinking again? But they don't know, but the audience can see she's starting to see things. She's becoming delusional. Her parents come and get her, and they put her in a private facility because, you know, they got the insurance.
Yes.
They can sort of hide it, pay cash, whatever, because they got it like that.
Right.
So, interestingly, after she's been there a while, she keeps saying she wants to go home, and oh, the medicine isn't helping. And then at some point in one of the last visits, the doctor sits down with her and her husband, and he says, well, through all my observations and trial and error, etc., I do want to tell you I have a diagnosis. And he says, she's schizophrenic. And the husband, oh, no, she's just upset or no, you go back and look at this again. And you can see that she's actually come to accept the diagnosis. And it's like she's much calmer because now everything makes sense.
Yes.
Even the alcoholism, because
Yes.
the doctor's explaining that she was, what Helen, you all may say, medicating her symptoms, right? So when she started to have symptoms after her first child was born, she started drinking. She thought, well, everybody experiences
Yes.
this,
Yes.
right? So clearly this is a milder case of schizophrenia because, Helen, am I right? We can see it on a spectrum, right? From mild to very severe. When we're watching TV, it's always this severe, sort of crazy person out on the street who has to be controlled. But I was just thinking about that in terms of our children. Oftentimes there may be something wrong. One, it could be because of trauma.
Yes.
Could be an individual or a series of traumas in their life, or could be what psychologists and historians would call historical trauma, or we think of as generational trauma, certainly as black folks from the Middle Passage onward, until we resolve history, it'll keep repeating itself in our lives. But with her, she was from an elite, well-off family. She knew she'd be well cared for. And they were able to see, instead of thinking of her as a criminal
Right.
who had done these bad things, oh, she's a drunk. No. She had been medicating herself and
Yes.
these symptoms, and now that she's not medicating herself with alcohol and taking the proper medication for the proper diagnosis, we're going to see something very different
Different.
going on.
Absolutely.
And we're starting to see some signs where she's like, oh my God, now that I'm thinking clearly, I can realize, I did this, I did that. Now her husband is like, no, you didn't, because she'll be in trouble if the world finds out what she really did, right?
Okay.
But she's come to herself, and now she realizes. So, given that, between the two of you, I want you to talk a bit about, Helen, if you can say something about historical trauma and something about how we might medicate ourselves instead of having to come face to face with what might be really going on individually or as a community of people. And then with our young people, oftentimes get involved with alcohol and drugs. Might there be some self-medication going on that could be skewing diagnoses? That was a big complex question, but
Okay.
have at it.
Great. So real quickly, in terms of historical trauma, that research really has emerged from people, Native Americans. And that's where
love
we
it.
see it in terms of indigenous psychologists talking about that. And what it really deals with is intergenerational trauma that that's related to being displaced from one's lands, from one's rights, from one's community, and it disrupts not only family systems but community systems. And what folks have found is that when people experience this type of historical trauma, that there are higher rates of substance abuse within those communities.
Yes.
I just wanted to add that.
That's a piece I didn't know, because usually when I think about historical trauma, I think about African Americans and slavery and colonialism. But we know every group of people who have been oppressed around the world would have their own experience of historical trauma. And I love that we just learned the research we're studying actually emerged from Native communities.
At least in psychology,
Right,
they talk
right,
about this
right.
historical trauma and what it
That's
means.
wonderful.
it
And
is a-
y'all who are listening, y'all know that's about genocide and that kind of thing. Helen called it displacement. That was a real nice way of saying stealing people's land and making them live somewhere else. And we know that
forcing them to go to schools, abuse that they experienced in the boarding schools.
making them not be able to speak their own language, right? So yes, that's what we mean by historical trauma, and we all have our own story. stories of it. So Regina, get ready with that.
And
Yes,
just,
Helen.
so the ways that people numb themselves
Yes.
are through substance use and can be through any type of excess. It could be through sexual encounters.
That's right.
It can be through anything. that can-
Addictions, eating.
Yeah.
Black folks, y'all know we
Anything
got
to
the
make us
highest
comfort.
rates of obesity in the country, and some of that is about medicating ourselves with food, right?
Making us feel comfortable.
We're trying to
soothing
find some
our
comfort
anxieties, our
That's right.
lack of belongingness, etc.
Yes. So we have we had a call. Did we have a call? We lost it? Oh, 3 minutes. I thought you meant line 3. You know, we try to steal all the time we can from Brother Sam over there. So, Regina.
Yes.
What do you think about that? Do you see a role that historical trauma and self-medication might be playing in the families you're organizing with?
I do, and I don't think that what we see in society and the culture around social media and the advertisements in the music helps, especially for our young people. So there's a young lady I was talking with today who actually told me that her family member, a young person, had been experiencing psychosis and she didn't know what it was. And, you know, in our culture, it's difficult to come and say, Mom, I'm hearing voices, or Dad, I'm hearing voices, and what that means, because I think it's scary for us. And so this particular young person is struggling with marijuana usage at this point. And so I'm a parent that ascribes to this for my daughter. At this point, I know that she's not using any type of drugs or alcohol, and that it is my due diligence and responsibility to do everything that I can to prevent her from going down that road. Yes, she does take medication that's prescribed to her, but that is to help deal with the psychosis, because she does deal with some
and
psychosis.
She gets regular checkups.
Yes.
Is the medication still the right one?
Yes, absolutely. But I do think that we have to be very careful about also what we teach our children and modeling. Are we taking care of our mental health? Because I have found that my daughter's mental health crises can trigger my own crises. When I was younger and I was in the military, I had struggles with alcohol usage, and I stopped drinking, hadn't drank for 20 years, but there have been times when the stress levels have been very high, and it was very tempting.
That's
but
why
I
they
had
say
to deal
once
with
an
them.
alcoholic,
Yes.
always an alcoholic. You
Yes.
just might be a sober alcoholic.
Absolutely, and I don't, have any shame in that. I share that with her.
Beautiful.
Because I want her to understand it's not easy, but it's an everyday fight to live in recovery.
Yes, it is. So we just opened the door on this. So I've already tricked Regina into thinking she's got to come back, because as they're forming this new alliance, of
Yes.
course, you set goals, you have benchmarks. By this date, we'll do this, we'll
Yes.
do that. So Regina is going to come back, I would say, regularly to let us know how the alliance is going. Know that when you don't see Helen, she's still in the background doing her thing for us. Y'all, let's hold hands as we work through this trauma and seek justice together. If you think something's wrong, there probably is. Speak up, look for help, turn to the Alliance. It's ready to help you now. If you have any questions, you can get on the internet right now and maybe just Google the Access Initiative for now, and you'll get to Regina and the Alliance. So thank you so much, Regina Kreider and Professor Helen Neville. I'm Imani Bazzell, your host for Access Live. As I say, keep holding hands, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Access Live. Access Initiative is a trauma and justice-informed system of care. We're glad that you joined us today. Please join us every Wednesday at 2:00 p.m. for Access Live. Thank you and be well.